Well, when I was sitting down here, I saw that my friend Ray McGovern came in, who's a former CIA analyst who was actually George H.W. Bush's national security briefer when he was the Vice President of the United States. And I'd like to propose Ray as Joe Biden's new advisor on national security. Ray McGovern is one of the courageous people that has served in very sensitive capacities in this country that's had the courage to speak out and actually has confronted Donald Rumsfeld and other officials publicly during both the Bush and the Obama administrations. And I also want to thank Ann Wright, who I've come to know quite well and have tremendous respect for. It's officials that speak out, it's veterans that speak out, that ultimately provides the most credible dissident voice that we hear in this society. And I would hope others would follow their model. Speaking of lack of dissidence, though, I want to talk about the Congress for a moment. Last week, I spent a good part of my week calling around to congressional offices, Democratic congressional offices, trying to get members of Congress that have identified themselves as anti-war to say something, anything, about the leaked news, it was intentionally leaked, that the Obama administration had authorized the assassination of a U.S. citizen, Anwar al-Awlaki, who was born and raised in the United States and currently lives in Yemen. The only member of Congress that would go on record about this at all was Congressman Dennis Kucinich. In fact, Congressman Kucinich has taken his concerns all the way to the top of the White House and has expressed his belief that this represents a moral crisis in this country, but also that it is almost certainly illegal and unconstitutional to have the U.S. government serve as the police, the prosecutor, the judge, the jury, and the executioner, particularly of one of its own citizens. So I thank Congressman Kucinich for being a lone voice on that issue. Courage is not defined when someone like George W. Bush is in the White House if you're in the Democratic Party. Courage is defined when Barack Obama is in the White House. And we have seen a systematic lack of courage when it's come to standing up against the very policies that continue. Right now, in this country, we are in the midst of the most radical privatization agenda in history. And I used to say that all the time during the Bush administration. And the unfortunate reality is that the Obama administration has continued and escalated this privatization trend. Right now in the United States, the entire government is basically privatized. In fact, 100% of people in this country that make $100,000 or less might as well remit everything that they owe in taxes to contractors rather than paying the government. That's how that's a dead-on fact. That's how privatized the society is. 100% of people in this country that make less than $100,000, that's 90% of taxpayers might as well pay everything that they owe to private corporations instead of the government, because that's how much of government has been outsourced in this society. There are 18 U.S. intelligence agencies, various intelligence agencies on the military and on the civilian side. 70% of their combined budget is outsourced to for-profit corporations that simultaneously work for the United States government, as well as multinational corporations and foreign governments. We have radically outsourced the intelligence bureaucracy in this country because we've radically outsourced everything. 69% of the Department of Defense's total workforce, I'm not just talking about who's on the battlefield, 69% of the Pentagon's entire workforce is now privatized, private contractors. In Afghanistan, it perhaps raises the most staggering statistics. The Obama administration is infinitely worse in Afghanistan in terms of its employment of mercenaries and other private contractors than the Bush administration was. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss, and in the case of Afghanistan and privatization, Obama is much worse. Right now in Afghanistan, there are 104,000 Department of Defense contractors operating alongside 68,000 U.S. troops. So there's almost a 2-to-1 ratio of private sector for-profit forces that are on the U.S. government payroll versus the active duty or actual military forces in the country. That's not to take into account the fact that the State Department has 14,000 contractors in Afghanistan right now. Obama doubled the number of armed contractors in that country from 5,000 to 10,000 on the U.S. government payroll. 10,000 may sound like a small number. These are 10,000 armed contractors. But if you know anything about the military, you know anything about special forces, you know that 30 Blackwater guys who are former Navy SEALs are worth a heck of a lot more Army grunts in terms of what they're able to do, the damage that they're able to cause. So when we talk about 5,000 to 10,000 armed contractors there, in the case of Blackwater and some other firms, we're talking about people that are not in their 20s and they're not rent-a-cops. We're talking about people that are, in many cases, in their early 30s to mid-30s or beyond, who have substantial experience in what's called wet operations, killing people, and doing it in a very sophisticated way. So this is part of what the Obama administration is doing in Afghanistan, is expanding the use of these mercenary forces. So we are in a situation where, within a matter of months, and certainly within a year, the United States is going to have upwards of 220 to 250,000 U.S. government-funded personnel occupying Afghanistan right now. A far cry from the 70,000 U.S. soldiers that those Americans that pay attention understand the United States has in Afghanistan. And this is a country where the President's own National Security Advisor, General James Jones, said that there are less than 100 al-Qaeda operatives and have no ability whatsoever to strike at the United States. That was the stated rationale and reasoning for being in Afghanistan, was to hunt down those that were responsible for 9/11, and then it became a broader war against al-Qaeda. Well, General Jones says there are less than 100 individuals there, yet the United States is moving toward a force of 220 to 250,000 individuals that are on the ground in the U.S. government payroll. I want to tell you a little bit about the historical context of this privatization agenda that the Obama administration has co-signed and escalated and intensified. This began in reality with the rise of the U.S. military-industrial complex, but it was really put on the fast track when Dick Cheney was the defense secretary under George H.W. Bush. Cheney, when he was defense secretary, hired a division of Halliburton, the company that he would then go on to head during the 1990s, to do a study on how to privatize as much of the military bureaucracy as possible. He essentially created a huge market for Halliburton and then went on to head that company. And when we talk about Cheney and Halliburton, almost never do people say, who gave them all the contracts when he was at Halliburton? Well, it was President Clinton. Clinton was a major supporter of the radical privatization of war and also the creation of an armed paramilitary force that would be under the official framework of the State Department. Clinton created the privatized program that Blackwater currently works under for the State Department, and he did it in the 90s in Haiti, and then expanded it to Bosnia, and expanded it and then into the war in the former Yugoslavia, often referred to as the Kosovo War. He gave huge contracts to Halliburton, to Military Professional Resources Incorporated, to DynCorp, the companies that now are household names in the mercenary or war business. Clinton gave Blackwater, the most notorious mercenary company, its operating license. Blackwater didn't start under President Bush, although it benefited tremendously from his belligerent policies. It started under Clinton, and Clinton gave them the authorization to be a U.S. government vendor. So it's been a bipartisan addiction to using these kinds of privatized forces. There is no greater symbol of how little things have changed with U.S. foreign policy than the fact that Blackwater continues to be on the U.S. government payroll in contracts authorized by the Obama administration. Blackwater guards Ambassador Carl Eikenberry to this moment in Afghanistan. Blackwater is training the Afghan National Police in counter-narcotics and controls, well, this is a private company, 4 forward operating bases inside of Afghanistan that we know of. Potentially, they have more than that. Blackwater also is a company that it was recently revealed by the Senate Armed Services Committee Chairman Carl Levin that has created shell companies to try to trick the government into giving Blackwater contracts without knowing that it's actually Blackwater. They created a company called Paravan, which did not exist until 3 months before it bid on a contract saying that it had years of experience. Paravan apparently conspired with the war giant Raytheon to defraud the government and to give Blackwater continued contracts inside of Afghanistan. To give you a sense of how embedded they remain in deeply sensitive U.S. intelligence operations, when the CIA suffered one of its most devastating attacks in history that we know of, in the Afghan city of Khost, December 30th of last year, 2 Blackwater operatives were among the dead, and a third, I understand from sources inside the company, was wounded. This was at a meeting where all of the top CIA people in Afghanistan were supposed to be meeting with someone described as the golden goose of U.S. intelligence, and had just come from a meeting with Ayman al-Zawahiri, according to the CIA information at the time. He came in and was able to blow himself up in the presence of these individuals, and the Blackwater men were supposedly doing the security for that operation. But I have information that also indicates that they were also working on the intelligence side, because Blackwater has its own private CIA called Total Intelligence Solutions, which was built up by one of the biggest thugs ever to serve in the CIA, a man named Cofer Black, along with his deputy, Robert Richer. They built the private CIA for Eric Prince that wins U.S. government contracts and other contracts around the world. It's a company whose former president, Gary Jackson, has been indicted along with 4 other Blackwater executives on federal weapons charges for improperly possessing automatic weapons inside of the United States. And the allegation the government makes is that when they came to try to examine those, the president of Blackwater ordered that they move the weapons, and this is something you won't read in the paper, from the public armory of Blackwater, meaning the one that the officials knew about, to the armory of a Blackwater affiliate called XPG Services. XPG Services is Blackwater's OGA business, other government agency business. This is the company that was used when Eric Prince was running hit squads around the world. They had them moved into that armory because they believed that they would be able to shield them from even ATF agents, because they would have been the business of the CIA rather than Blackwater. And yet this isn't coming out in the press. No one's talking about this, but this is a company that has been involved with assassinating people around the globe, and yet continues to be employed and hired by the Obama administration. Hillary Clinton, on the campaign trail when she was running for president, said that if she was elected president, she would move to ban Blackwater and other mercenary companies. She's not their boss. She's not guarded by them when she goes around the world. Hillary Clinton is a major hypocrite on the issue of mercenaries. If she was serious about the pledge on the campaign trail, she would have fired her as Secretary of State. Blackwater is supposedly no longer in Iraq, but they are a major part of the U.S. war machine, both in the United States and abroad. I want to broaden out from this, because I didn't come here intending to only talk about Blackwater, but I think it's an important way of understanding how little things have changed, that even this company could continue to win major lucrative contracts, bidding right now for $1 billion contracts, still in the running for the State Department contracts. In Iraq, as the U.S. begins its quote-unquote drawdown, the mercenary companies see a tremendous opportunity that's already paying off. On the eve of the 2008 election, Joseph Schmitz, who was then one of the top officials at Blackwater, said the following: "There's a scenario where we could, as a government, the United States, could pull back the military footprint, and there would then be a need for more private contractors to go in." It's a direct quote from a Blackwater executive. That's exactly what's happening. Nowhere is this more pronounced than at the monstrous U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, the largest embassy that any nation in the history of civilization has built anywhere. It's the size of 80 football fields, 10 times bigger than any other U.S. embassy. Cost $700 million, the size of Vatican City. The Vatican has embassies around the world. We have an embassy the size of the Vatican that's inside of Iraq right now.
That's because we're so fond of diplomacy.
Right. So it has the largest CIA station in the world, and it has protected by a paramilitary force of 3,000 and growing. That is one of the ways that they're going to use to do a backdoor occupation in Iraq, is because they'll use the embassy as a justification for a buildup of private military forces. Also, as the United States officially shifts into what they describe as a training role inside of Iraq, it's going to open the door for more mercenary companies to step in. In Pakistan right now, the Obama administration is asking the Congress to fund the creation of another monstrous U.S. embassy in the capital, Islamabad, that is modeled after the Iraq embassy. This is in a country that we supposedly are not at war with or at war against, and a country that the U.S. has no designs to remain in the future. They also have other plans to build them in Lahore, as well as in Peshawar as well. The United States is waging currently a covert war inside of Pakistan, and it comes in the form of U.S. Special Operations Forces operating under the Joint Special Operations Command, which is the all-star team of special forces that draws from the Navy SEALs, the Delta Force, the Night Stalkers of the 160th Aviation Division. General McChrystal ran the JSOC from 2003 to 2008. It was basically Dick Cheney's private little military. They coordinated their activities, the JSOC did, with Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld, and acted as a global hit squad around the world. I first reported on Blackwater's involvement with JSOC inside of Pakistan last November, and I talked to 2 well-placed military intelligence sources, a well-placed special forces source, and a senior Blackwater executive with direct knowledge of the program, who told me that Blackwater forces were working on a parallel drone bombing campaign inside Pakistan that was run by JSOC, not the CIA. and that Blackwater operatives were helping to plan snatch and grab operations inside of Pakistan, but also in Uzbekistan and other countries as well. The night before that story went to press, I received a phone call on my cell phone from an official representing Admiral Mike Mullen, the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It was an unsolicited call. I hadn't asked him for comment. We hadn't gotten to that stage yet where we went to the military. I received this phone call unprompted, unsolicited, and it was a clear attempt at intimidation. And what I was told by an official who was speaking on behalf of Admiral Mike Mullen is that if we published the story, I would be, quote, on thin ice. It's a direct quote. No official from the Joint Chiefs of Staff or from the military or from the White House would provide any official denial on the record with their name. They offered to have unnamed officials deny it. The only statement that anyone in officialdom would give me on the reporting of Blackwater and JSOC running an assassination program parallel to the CIA's in Afghanistan and Pakistan was from Captain John Kirby, Mullen's spokesperson, who said, quote, "We do not discuss current operations one way or the other, regardless of their nature." It got brought up at the Department of Defense press briefing the next day, and Jeff Morrell, the Pentagon spokesperson, didn't deny it and said, "We don't respond to conspiracies published by magazines," and then referred people to the State Department. The State Department said, "We have no idea what you're talking about." The next day then, the only government response to come out was an unsigned statement from the U.S. Embassy in Islamabad saying that the story, and they didn't even name me or the magazine, but the story about JSOC and Blackwater that appeared recently in the U.S. magazine was totally false. Behind closed doors, the U.S. military hierarchy told Pakistani officials on the ground that I had essentially invented the story. There's a classified report that was done by a brigadier general that details all of this. Called it a conspiracy theory. They attempted to smear me, and they also went after Seymour Hersh of the New Yorker for his reporting on Pakistan with on the issue of nuclear weapons. Then in January, Defense Secretary Gates visited Pakistan, and he was being interviewed by Express TV live in Pakistan. And he stated that both Blackwater and DynCorp were, quote, operating as individual companies here in Pakistan, which flew in the face of everything that they had said when they said there's no Blackwater in Pakistan. The Minister of Interior of Pakistan offered to resign if anyone had presented evidence that Blackwater was in the country, and Gates goes there and confirms it. Well, apparently he hadn't gotten the memo that there's a counter-narrative. And the Pentagon, though, what's amazing, distributed that transcript of his remarks there. I got it in an email. That's how I found out about it. I got it from the Pentagon. And so within hours of that, the Pentagon tried to quash the story, saying it was a conspiracy theory. Well, it was Gates in on the conspiracy theory. And then they said, well, he had misspoke. And what's the old saying? Never believe anything until it's officially denied. And then in February of this year, ABC News confirmed that Blackwater was operating in Pakistan and told the story of an operation called Vibrant Fury, where Blackwater had been embedded with JSOC operatives on a raid inside of Pakistan. They also said that Blackwater, this division of Blackwater, was working with JSOC and the CIA in countries around the globe, including the Philippines, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. Eric Prince, the owner of Blackwater, confirmed that not only had he run a secret assassination program for the government, but that he actually bankrolled some of the operations himself. And what's significant about that, and he has very deep pockets, is that it's the ultimate plausible deniability machine. When you actually don't have to have any form of a paper trail, you don't even have to go to the process, which is historically what's done, of laundering money. You just have some billionaire with operations around the globe funded for the government. And that's exactly what Eric Prince was doing. So when we talk about the drone bombing campaign, the CIA needs to be held accountable for this. The Congress needs to be held accountable for not stopping it. Those Congress members who are briefed on it need to be held accountable for that. But we can't get off the hook the fact that McChrystal's boys from JSOC are running their own entirely unaccountable assassination program that no one talks about, that almost never gets mentioned in the papers. Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, who was the former Chief of Staff to Colin Powell, when I spoke to him about this, told me the following about the creation of Bush's relationship with JSOC. He said, Cheney and Rumsfeld went directly into JSOC. I think they went into JSOC at times, perhaps most frequently, without the Special Operations Commander at the time even knowing it. The receptivity in JSOC was quite good. I think Cheney was actually giving McChrystal instructions, and McChrystal was asking him for instructions. This is Wilkerson, who also would have received briefings at Delta Force, so he's not speaking from a position where he isn't aware of what's happening at the time. He said at that point, you had JSOC operating as an extension of the administration, doing things the executive branch, Reed, Cheney, and Rumsfeld wanted it to do. This would be more or less carte blanche. You need to do it, do it. It was very alarming for me as a conventional soldier. This is a force that is now at the center of President Obama's Afghanistan policy. And the fact that General McChrystal has ascended to become the commander of the entire war, from going from the very dark, unaccountable side of the force with JSOC to now running the entire thing, it's no accident that we see the kinds of massacres that we're seeing in the nighttime raids. It's the stamp of what JSOC is all about. The massacre that David mentioned earlier, where U.S. Special Forces killed these 5 individuals, including 3 women, and then went in, according to Afghan witnesses, and tried to carve out the bullets to cover it up and make it look as though the Taliban had done it. This was initially denied by the U.S., or they would say NATO, but it's the U.S. I don't like saying NATO because the U.S. is running this thing. And these NATO countries are either blackmailed, bribed, cajoled, or they're crooks of their own running things. The New York Times reported that military officials had, quote, suggested that the women had all been stabbed to death or had died by other means before the raid, implying that their own relatives may have killed them. Later, McChrystal admitted that U.S. forces had done it, and that Vice Admiral William McRaven, who's the current head of the Joint Special Operations Command, visited with the family, with some of the family members of those that were killed, and offered them 2 sheep as a condolence payment. Now, the father of the dead Afghans seems like an incredible individual on one level, because he said he accepted the apology. But the Afghan people don't need sheep from JSOC. They need an end to nighttime raids, an end to killing civilians, and an end at these attempts to cover them up. I'm running out of time, so I'll run quickly here through something that I think is very important for us to talk about. Last week, the State Department just posted the new contract for worldwide protective services, which is the way that the State Department now does security. It's where Blackwater, Triple Canopy, DynCorp make their bread and butter in the mercenary world of the U.S. government. It's guarding the ambassadors, the diplomats. It's basically making sure that the occupation runs. And these are high-level security positions that are compensated to the tune of $650 a day for a seasoned Special Forces operator. And I looked on the list of companies that were bidding for this contract. You know, there's the heavy hitters there, the Lockheed Martins and the DynCorps and many companies with horrible human rights records. The State Department says Blackwater is eligible to bid for it, which is a whole other story. This is a company that shouldn't be in existence. It should be shut down. But there were 2 companies that jumped out, and this is the last thing I'm going to talk about here. One I was familiar with because I met them in New Orleans. It's a company run by former Israeli Special Forces soldiers and Israeli intelligence officers. And the company, which is now incorporated in Texas, is called Instinctive Shooting International, ISI. Instinctive Shooting International is run by a man named Hanan Yadin, who's a former member of the Israeli National Counterterrorism Agency, a veteran of the IDF, and received advanced training at Israel's Anti-Terror Academy. I encountered the Instinctive Shooting International operatives when they were operating an armed checkpoint on the streets of a U.S. city in New Orleans, stopping individuals that were coming by a private gated community. Their website at the time, and I have a screen capture of it, described ISI's personnel as, quote, veterans of the Israeli Special Task Forces from the following Israeli government bodies: the IDF, the Israeli National Police Counterterrorism Units, instructors of Israel National Police Counterterrorism Units, General Security Services, the Shin Bet, and other restricted intelligence agencies. This is a company that currently has a 5-year contract with the United States military to train U.S. forces and is bidding to become the official bodyguards of U.S. diplomats in the following countries: Iraq, Muslim country; Afghanistan, Muslim country, as well as in Jerusalem. This is a company that is run by someone who seems to have a PhD in thuggery and is for all practical purposes an agent of Israel. And yet they are in the lead, they are in the bidding now for this. The other company is Evergreen, which is perhaps best known for offering unsolicited on the eve of the 2008 election to offer to guard the voting in Oregon, which votes by mail and doesn't even vote in person. Evergreen is a longtime CIA contractor. The fact that Blackwater is being allowed to bid on this, the fact that those are the kind of companies that respond to these, give you a good indication of how similar the climate is right now in the mercenary world to that which existed under the Bush administration. And what I'll say at the end is that I'm not a policy person, but the bare minimum that Congress could do on this would be to take up Jan Schakowsky's legislation, the Stop Outsourcing Security Act. There's only a handful of sponsors right now. Hillary Clinton was second only with Bernie Sanders sponsoring it in the Senate. Right now, only Bernie Sanders is sponsoring it on the Senate side. It's a concrete step. There's no justification for using these forces. Show me someone that actually can explain to you policy-wise why we need to use these mercenaries. Congress has been remiss in its duties. It remains remiss in its duties. And the fact that President Obama is the president, he's from their party, unfortunately is the undeniable motivation for continuing to support policies that some of them once opposed and morally they know are wrong. Thank you.